Hello, this video I'm going to re-upload. I had taken it down because a friend of mine pointed out some flaws in my analysis, which was to do with how the sun activity, when it's low, is coinciding with unconscious activity, namely the First World War, the Second World War and the pandemic. And a friend of mine pointed out that I had the dates for the Second World War down wrong. My mistake. I must have been busy. But the thing is actually that when did the Second World War actually begin? Well, officially it's in 1939, which I suppose is the year in which the other side decided to fight. That moment is called the beginning of the Second World War, but in fact many things had happened in the preceding 5 or 10 years, including the Italians invading Ethiopia, the Japanese invading China, the Germans invading the Rhineland, and a massive civil war in Spain, and an economic crisis in the USA. So many elements of unconscious behavior did occur in those years preceding 1939. Originally I had 1935 marked on the map. So for that reason, I'm going to upload it again, with the idea being that those historical dates, the official dates, are not really the peak of unconscious behavior. Hello there. This morning I happened upon a graph of the solar sunspot activity for the last 100 years, and it was very interesting, and I'm going to put the graph up so you can have a look at it. What you can see very clearly is that 2020, when COVID happened, it was when the solar activity, the sunspot activity, was at a minimum. The sunspot activity is what we see on the surface, but of course it indicates what's going on inside the sun. The sun has a cycle, and when the sunspot activity is low, it means that the sun is sleeping, essentially. The sun is sleeping. It is less active. The interesting thing is, and I've marked this on the graph, that 1914 and 1935 were also at a solar minimum, a time when the sun was sleeping. I've marked them with small lines. You can have a look at those points. I think 1935, it was just after the minimum, basically. And of course those dates are the dates of the beginning of World War I, World War II, and 2020 was the COVID pandemic. So what does it mean? Well, it's interesting because last night I really felt the night come over me. It's the late end of the summer, an interesting time between seasons. The first touch of autumn can be felt, and it's been a long hot summer, a joyful time really. And I've been able to feel the seasonal changes very clearly, and I feel drawn to the night. This time of year you can start to see Orion, the hunter, in the sky, and it's really wonderful, the return of the night. I really enjoy it. Unfortunately, in this country, next month the government forces everybody to break the natural rhythm and changes the clock 1 hour, just to disturb people, which is the great joy of the false self, is to destroy everything that is natural. And what will happen then is that although we have been moving gently and gradually towards the night, suddenly we will be back with daylight, and we'll have to go through that transition again, which is completely insane. But we live on a planet of lunatics, and devious, cunning, weaving lunatics at that. I have very clear memories of many times going to work in the winter, in the morning, and struggling to get my shit together and get out of the door, and arriving at work and walking into the office under the strip lights and feeling very groggy, very unlike the summer. Why is that? Why is everything groggy in the winter? Well, it's because the sun's not there. It's the same thing in the last few weeks. We've had a few days where in the morning there is no sun. There is simply a white dome above the head. No blue sky, no sun. And it's the same thing. It's not a joyful morning. What is happening there, and I've been observing this, is that, well, obviously I'm less awake than normal, which means that the subconscious elements start to enter my consciousness in a general sense. They start to dominate my identity functioning. Instead of when it's bright and sunny and I feel clear and sharp and in control, when there's less sun, I am groggy, I'm not quite there, and the subconscious elements start to do their crazy shit. Because they're all a bit wild, they're not under control, they are subconscious, like the animals, the animal power in the foundation of my being. And they start to do their stuff because the guardian is not there. When you're more awake, it means that the guardian is there, which, in reference to what I have described before, is some aspect of the hunting mind. Those subconscious elements, I'm thinking about the Sphinx now and the different parts that are inside of us. Our real power comes from these subconscious elements, but because they are subconscious, they live at a lower level, and they always will. And on the journey of the path, there is a very difficult, narrow channel to travel in order to activate the higher identity, the real self, and to connect it with the subconscious parts of us, so that the final being has the power of the subconscious elements, but it flows seamlessly into the higher identity. That is a self-realized being, or at least it should be. It should be. That is what Gurdjieff is talking about. The real man is a man who has that power, but it is seamlessly integrated into the higher self. It's very obvious that when the sun comes up, you're more awake. In the summer, you're more awake. Why? Because your awakeness is caused by the sun. And when the sun is not there at night, your awakeness, your presence drifts away. The same thing happens in winter, and the same thing happens when the sunspots and the solar activity is at a lower ebb. At that point, people have less control of themselves. That is why World War I, World War II and COVID happened. They have less control of their subconscious elements. And they start to see things that aren't there. They start to create enemies. And they start to overreact and become violent. And the laws of the lower nature dominate. That is what's happening. And I suppose today, we're 2022, there have been various consequences that have flowed out from the pandemic in inverted commas. In other words, the unconscious reactions to certain things that have happened in the planet, in human society, because the solar activity has been low and people have been in general quite asleep inside. And let's hope that the consequences of all that don't last for too long, and then we can move on. And as the sun wakes up again according to its cycle, then things will be better. Now I've pulled out a couple of quotes from Gurdjieff just quickly that I thought were interesting in relation to this. Gurdjieff says, "Going from one of these disreputable places, brothels, to another, we eventually reach the famous streets of Montmartre in Paris, which are not strictly speaking on Montmartre itself, but on the lowest slope of the district of that name, which abounds in every kind of disreputable nightclub, intended however not for the beings of the community of France, but exclusively for foreigners. Aside from these dubious establishments, there are many restaurants there, also designed for foreigners, that stay open until dawn. This whole district in general comes to life only at night. By day it is almost dead, as they express it, and not one foreign visitor ever goes there." Well, what is it that comes to life at night? What is it that comes out to play at night? And another quote from Gurdjieff, "Of course, the thought never enters the head of any of them that these Americans importing this good-for-nothing root are indeed in a subjective sense crazy, yet objectively they are doing neither more nor less, as your favourites say, than robbing the beings of this Russia in broad daylight." Well, I just thought that phrase, to rob somebody in broad daylight, people know that bad behaviour normally happens at night, and for the aforementioned reasons. Now I'm going to play, in a minute, I'm going to play a little sound of the sun, which is part of the recordings that NASA and other agencies have made of the solar activity. I think it's normally done from the electromagnetic radiations of the sun that are recorded, and then they're converted into something that we can hear, so that you can get a sense of things. You could also get a sense of things if you observed the visible light of the sun change, and whether you hear the changes or whether you see the changes over time, you start to feel what the sun is doing, and your intelligence can decode it. In the same way, something that you see visually or that you hear can be discordant or concordant, and your intelligence will be able to discern the difference. So when you come to listen